Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another spectacular Spark webinar. We are so excited to have Ryan Laney here this evening, and we'll be talking about the film Welcome to Chechnya. It's an interesting documentary which has quite a number of visual effects, which in itself is unique. But it also covers a very important topic, and it's something that was happening through the late 2010s and really hasn't subsided in a lot of places. And that's the problem with human rights and anti-gay purges. And this film focuses on the Chechen refugees from Russia who were trying to escape the oppression by the fact that they had a particular sexual identity. And so David France put together this powerful film that in many ways covered a lot of topics that are still very, very contemporary here. And thanks to the technology that Ryan Laney has been developing with his company, Teus Media, the folks involved in this documentary were able to be disguised in a situation where, you know, it could cost someone's life, unfortunately, and that's actually the price of having a particular sexual identity, believe it or not, in 2021. And we all know that that is still a huge topic. Ryan has a great background in visual effects. He's been involved in the industry for over 2 decades. And he's been through studios the likes of Industrial Light and Magic and Digital Domain, Sony Picture Imageworks, and he has a very deep interest in machine learning as it applies to visual effects, and that's how he founded his company, Teus Media. You might recognize some of the films that he has worked on in the past, reaching all the way back to things like Fight Club and Jurassic Park 3, or Star Wars 2 and Harry Potter and Spider-Man 3, and all the way up to Ant-Man. But now I think, you know, some of this technology is being applied to a very important cause, and seeing how that it can work in something in a documentary genre. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Ryan Laney to Spark in our audience. Take it away, Ryan.
Thank you, Larry. That's a fantastic intro. Yeah, I'm not surprised at how wordless I am right this second. That was a lot of history that I hadn't thought about in a while, and so thank you for covering it all. All good films. Welcome to Chechnya was really interesting. We didn't develop the technology and then sort of apply it to Chechnya, which you'll see in this presentation, but we developed it with Welcome to Chechnya, and I think that's one interesting sort of like footnote to that. And now that we've tasted this idea of helping human rights fronts, I'm not sure we'll ever go back to mainstream media. So yeah. Anyway, I have a presentation here, so let me share my screen.
Okay, and while you're setting that up, I should make a note for those of you in the audience that have any questions. Please put it in the Q&A, and we'll be talking to Ryan after the presentation.
Yeah, so we'll jump straight in, and I'll get to it so we can get to the Q&A, because sometimes that's the most fun part. We titled this Protecting Identities with Digital Veils. In a simple sense, that's what we're doing. We're going to talk a little bit about the project that got us into this, which is Welcome to Chechnya. Really fantastic opportunity to be part of this film and help them solve their issues with presenting witness testimony. We'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges of working with documentary footage, and a lot about how we solve those challenges through deep machine learning, and neural networks. Digital veils are a fancy blurry oval. We try to use this term, actually our dailies say FBO, because we want to make sure that we're sort of anchored in this idea that we are really about identity protection and not trying to do a full face replacement. They are serving the same functions. We're masking the face like face fogging, but we're doing it in a way that maintains the original emotional content. We want to make sure that everything that that person in the scene was all that would be originally conveyed in their own face would be conveyed through this veil. Obviously, we get compared a lot to face replacements, and the idea is very similar. With a stunt double, there's stunt action, but an actor's face and their expressions are completely replaced in front of the stunt doubles. I like this particular, this is from Jurassic Park in 1993. This is the first, I think on record, face replacement. And I like it because similar to our project, it wasn't planned. They didn't go in and bid this shot as a face replacement. The stunt double looked up. I hear from lore. And instead of reshooting, they decided that they would just go ahead and give it a shot and see if they could do a face replacement. And it worked. There's a second variety of face replacements, and that's with CG, where the actors it's the actor's actions completely, and that drives this CGI model, which is then used. So veils are more like this digital makeup or digital prosthetic variant. We use the face double's features only, and the original subject's face drives the movement entirely. Obviously, we're talking about Welcome to Chechnya. We already got a great intro. The film does chronicle this persecution of LGBTQ youths and the efforts of a couple of activist organizations in Chechnya and Russia who are providing rescue and relocation services for them. We've learned, through David's talking about this in the public, that this isn't just in Chechnya. This is in hotspots around the world. So I think it is a really important topic to be sort of aware of, that human rights are at risk all over. David France, the director of the film, went to Chechnya after reading about the atrocities, and he was allowed access to the shelter and the safe houses, and actually allowed to follow along in some of the rescue operations. In this story, as with many documentary films, witness testimony was essential. A typical filmmaker or journalist will put somebody in shadow or blur their faces to help protect their identities. Staging really wasn't an option in this, and that's because the mere presence of a camera in many scenarios could put the operation and everybody involved at risk. They used a lot of hidden cameras and shot things on iPhones. David also was not interested in just an overall blur, because it really puts a barrier between the audience and the subjects. David's an investigative journalist who moved over to filmmaking, and because he's investigating a story about people who are already dehumanized, it was critical for him to maintain a human connection between the audience and the subjects in the film. He had this kind of crazy idea. Instead to apply a rotoscoped cartoon effect, something like Scanner Darkly. And so they used Toon plugins, and they tried having artists paint over frames. They had trouble finding a solution that looked good and hid the identities well. Fast forward through many attempts, and they couldn't get this rotoscoping idea to work for several stylistic, logistical reasons. One of them was that the more they tried to push things to hide the identities, the more sort of grotesque in a way that that people became. So after about 18 months of filming and editing, David had a nearly finished film. They'd spent a year trying to find a solution, and I was told later they were just about to give up on searching for a viable solution. But this is when I was introduced to the team. When we got involved. So call it a North Star or mission statement. More often than not, I find it's valuable to outline metrics of success early on. Separating these ideas early on helps everyone stay focused on the mission critical aspects of a project. Why are you there? What are the things that you're really trying to answer? So what are they? And in this case, it's hide identities, obviously. But these people are actually running from their families in many cases, not just the government. With ethnic cleansing, there's a family component that is just horrific. So we had to hide their identity so well that their parents wouldn't recognize them. We also want to do it, which we learned from their Public Square Films early test. We needed to keep their humanity. A very big, important part of what David was after was making sure that the audience could empathize with the subjects in the film. And then, of course, the budget, if this text is too small to read, it represents the budget because it was very, very small. So David and his team, Alice, producer Alice Henty, they were looking for an affordable way to get this hour plus of roto done that would be required. Because of security concerns, they couldn't send it out to a roto farm. And so our first idea to reduce cost was by automating the effect using style transfer. And so this was kind of, we'd already done some other work with neural networks. And so this was our first step into image processing with neural networks. Still in this test, we noticed a couple of things. One is that we're still moving a lot of pixels. And the other is that the filter effects, even style transfers, were not necessarily hiding the identities as much as we would like. They were, in some cases, accentuating the characteristics of the people that were there. So moving kind of in two different directions, we focused the attention on the face region, and that gave us a sort of a downward pressure on effort per frame. The other is that we pushed the style transfer to move the features farther without, hopefully without dehumanizing them, as some of the earlier tests had done. But we were also looking, well, let me go back to our requirements here. We felt like we were moving towards a better idea of budget. We were doing a better job at hiding identities. But we weren't sure really about keeping their humanity, if this was still moving things too far. And at this point, we actually didn't even know how we might measure this metric of so well that their parents wouldn't recognize them. Focusing on this idea of keeping their humanity, style transfer yielded some improvements, but we really want to look at how else we might change faces in a more subtle way. And in this, this picture is from University of Glasgow, Face Research Lab. It came out around 2012. I was really impressed by how different every one of these faces looked. And at the same time, the pixel difference between the deltas between all of these faces was actually smaller than what we're doing with the style transfer. So, so we thought maybe there was a way we could create a transfer function by warping faces. If we could get a good 3D track, we might be able to move the bones underneath the face. So we tried it. This was a still we brought with us on our first meeting with David, Alice, and the Public Square team. And we got also into this idea of how we might measure this familial recognition. If we were able to disguise a well-known face, well, that might be a pretty good metric, because if we know who it is and we think we can't recognize them, that might be good. Obviously, this wasn't enough. Eyebrow, and lip shapes are still very similar, but we really felt like we were onto something in this more subtle, moving away from style transfer and an artistic effect, moving towards something that was more subtle. So we try to, and this video represents one of the shots from the film. This is Maxim Lupanov. You'll see him a lot because he is the one person in the film that we can actually show before and afters. Through the process, he was actually abducted and tortured, and but he's a Russian, and so the Chechens released him, and he was actually able to file suit against the Chechen government for being abducted and bring light to all this, which is really what brought attention to this issue in Chechnya. We gave a little more attention to key areas. The lips are more, and we really felt like we were onto something here. We did have a problem with, this worked for well-lit, stable camera scenarios, but quickly fell apart when we were trying to do point tracks or 3D tracks across scenes that were handheld or had a lot of grain. Around the same time, I came across a couple of papers that influenced the next couple of steps. On the left is a paper, Deep Image Analogy, which outlined a VGG19 network based model. And more importantly, showed the ideas that changing faces was possible, and that we weren't completely bonkers for having the idea that we could change identities in this way. The paper on the right is Semantic Style Transfer. And this was really important because it showed us how we could use mats to improve results by correlating areas of interest, such as eyes and the nose and the mouth area. These are key areas that we're going to focus in on for recognizing people. So this is a result of one of our first tests. It gave us some very interesting information. It showed us that by matching the lighting in the target scene in our data capture, the results were greatly improved compared to widely varied public data. Creating and training our own models off of something that was already very similar produced pretty outstanding results compared to everything else at the time, which is, for reference, 2018. So around the same time, StyleGAN wasn't out yet. Some of the other face stuff was around 64 pixels square. So we were feeling pretty good about this at this point. I talked about data capture. This was the data capture we used for that test. We shot in front of white because that's what we were matching for. We only had 3 cameras, so we had Abraham Luna, our test subject here, go through all the motions several times so we get a full grid. The motions we had him do were generic. We were basically trying to get the structure of the face. We also had him speak phonetic pangrams to give us lip shapes and facial expressions. He spoke the phonetic pangram 3 times, once with a smile, once with a neutral face, and once with a sad face. So the 3 cameras gave us additional angles, but you could very easily do this with 1 camera, shooting, just doing multiple takes. So at this point, we're feeling really good about meeting the priorities within the requirements that we outlined to start. Some of the artifacts of the neural networks were that it introduced some softness. And now we have a new concern because we're getting very close to a real face replacement, but it's not 100% because there is this softness. And so we, for anybody that's in CG, you've got this uncanny valley where the closer you get to being human, the harder it is. And so Public Square Films, David and his team found Dr. Talia Wheatley out of Dartmouth College, who had done some research in the uncanny valley. And we gave her this original test and a couple of other options to see, based on some other ideas that we had going on. On the left, we have the veiled face, but we actually pull the original eyes through, reveal it through a mat. And that gave us what we thought was going to be the best solution because the eyes were sharp. And then the one on the right is the veil under an artistic effect. And this went back to making sure that if David did want that artistic scanner darkly effect, that he could do it. And by veiling underneath the effect, they call it double encryption, be changing the identity, and so there wouldn't be any concern about original characteristics showing through. As expected, the rotoscoping landed on one end of the animacy scale, and the veils were on the other end, closer to the original photography. But to our surprise, the veils scored better when the participants were asked about being unsettled. One reason they gave is that they felt more comfortable knowing that the witness was protected. And this became a very a touch point to our, as we applied in the film, to make sure that we were always apparent. And that runs into some journalistic integrity issues as well, but it was really about making sure the audience understood that that we were protecting these people and we weren't putting them at risk by showing them. This is a short clip. It's the only video, sort of like pre-made video, but it's something I did for one of the awards we were involved with, and I think it does a pretty good job about summing up briefly. So I'll just play this. It's a minute long.
In shots, the subject's face was tracked using standard tools in combination with computer vision. The faces were stabilized into a face space which was used for grain removal, paintwork, and roto of anything crossing. Face orientation was aligned in a final preparation for the machine learning process. Each frame of the subject's face was compared to the face double's data, and similar matches were identified. Image sets were not manually selected but were an algorithmic best fit. The machine learning model was trained, finding patterns in the face sets and allowing us to separate the styles of the faces from the expressions. Once trained to a sufficient level, the model outputs were swapped, using the original subject's model to encode, but then using the face double's model to decode. The resulting transfer functions and the face renders created by them were free of intervention and so were objectively true and authentic representations of the source material. Compositing was a typical application of mattes, color correction, and grain work, with the exception of an additional blurry edge we added to emphasize where the picture had been modified. In the final composite, the work is apparent but not distracting, allowing the audience to focus on the story and the emotional content of the scenes.
Moving on to data capture. Using the patterns that worked for the test capture, we now needed to scale that up to capture data for 23 subjects that would be represented in the film. Johnny Han, Pierce Dennis, and Ray Huang prepped for the shoot, which spanned 5 days and covered over 200 line items in the matrix of lighting setup versus face double. The film had a lot of scenarios that we would need to represent. Lighting, interior bright, daylight, exterior shots, and dark of night. We had learned in an early test that the principal gradient, and that is the difference between the skin tone and the background, was really important. Here we have a network that was trained on a face with dark backgrounds and then applied to a face with light backgrounds, and with that gradient wrong, the face is applied backwards, which, interestingly enough, the expressions actually come through in a way that is believable. The mouth still moves and the eyes still blink. So it was a very off-putting image to see something that was moving partially real, but really not. Anyway, so to make sure that we could manage not have to shoot everything on white and on medium and on dark, we shot on blue screen so that we could replace those backgrounds as necessary for individual shots. The full data acquisition generated about 8 terabytes of data using this camera array of 9 cameras in those 5 days. And so we ended up having to develop an entire separate subsystem to ingest and manage the data. So anybody that's looking at shooting your own data, data acquisition and prep work is, I keep hearing this metric that is 80% of the work, and that's maybe an understatement. So yeah, casting for the shoot as the one part of the team was working on logistics of getting the equipment in, another team was working on finding talent. So Public Square Films reached out to their network and found volunteers who were willing to lend their faces as an act of activism. And from that pool, we matched the subjects in the film with doubles by age and body type. And so for this type of work, so far, it seems like body composition seems to be a really strong predictor for whether or not faces will work with particular overlays. Jawline is important, obviously, as well, but for some reason, something in the cheeks seems to show up. Again, we mentioned this before, but the data capture session is abstract. The goal is to get enough information for the neural network to learn how the face moves and how it pairs between the subject in the film and the face double. This was a big investment, unproven technology. So we decided also to shoot, in addition to our predetermined set of movements, we shot our safety, which was more emotive performances. And the thinking was that if the neural networks didn't work out, we could at least fall back on more traditional face replacement. I'm not sure how we would scale that, but that was our safety, is that if we knew that we had at least the exact frames, we would be able to do that. We did find and welcome Chechnya and several trials since then, but it is not necessary to emote in the capture. So this was a really important finding. In this case, the subject was crying in the film, and the network actually amplified the reflection of the C-stands in his eyes to match the appearance of welling of his tears. And so we felt like this was a really interesting find. This is a frame of that particular take where from which the color was matched. We've confirmed a few times now that pure data capture session with the right facial range of motion will produce correct emotive performance through the transfer. This is very exciting from a neural network perspective, because it means that we have a high degree of confidence that our network successfully detangles identity from the emotive expressions. So that is to say that we can comfortably say the emotion is from the subject 100% and not influenced by the face double and how they're emoting. This is important from an integrity perspective, because we want to make sure that we're not driving, we're not changing, we're not directing we want to get a pure read from the original subject in the film. There was a plan to shoot short takes of structured data. However, there were some issues on set that were unplanned and caused a big change in data management. The cameras wouldn't take a timing signal, something wrong with particular firmware, we're not sure, but without time code, the cameras themselves were not synchronized. And the remote triggering was also not working. So every time we needed to roll or cut, the AC had to manually trigger all 9 cameras. We also, sort of as a safety, this is Johnny directing action for a scene where Anna's walking profile to camera. We kept all 9 cameras rolling just in case, again, we didn't really know what we didn't know at that point. So we were being extra careful and generated a lot of extra data. This is that scene. So it was fantastic to be covered, but now that we've proven this detangling idea, our captures can be much tighter. Another issue that we found in the captures is that the in-between moments where the cameras were still rolling, the doubles were often looking up for direction or phonetic pangram cues. And so the data that came out was biased for those particular face directions or eye lines. And we did find eye lines just above center often were biased in our thing. We had to go in and add an gaze detector so that we could correct for that. Just to put it into pictures, our plan was structured. We ended up getting unstructured from a data management perspective. This went from short clips that could be easily labeled to sort of long data that's more like data in the wild. I mentioned the 8 terabytes of data. There were very, very long takes. There were multiple actions per take. And with this sort of 9 cameras times 5 days. We weren't sure how we were going to go in and manually label this stuff. So this turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Aside from the huge task it would have taken to manually review and log everything, we were able to write a new subsystem to retrieve what was needed. And this dev task in particular yielded some of the greatest value in all the work that we did, aside from the veiling itself. What this means is that instead of matching frames based on tags of what we intended the shots to be, they were actually matching based on the content of frames, so what they actually were instead of what they were meant to be. So in this sense, the frames that were matched between the subject in the film and the data set were completely abstracted from each other, giving more attention to frames that were actually the right pose or expression, and less to what we hoped those expressions were. So these are the subjects in the top corner, and the doubles are in the matching double faces. This gave us a really good data set when we went into training, because we knew that we already had angles and expressions that were similar to what we wanted in the end. But it also gave us a reverse lookup. This byproduct of from the subject to double lookup was the reverse of a double to a subject. This gave us, meant for every frame of the double, we could actually composite that frame over a background that was similar to where it would be in the shot. So for every shot, for every frame, a matched double frame, we did these pre-composites. This helped us in 2 ways. The network was able to converge faster because we were already in the neighborhood of a whole frame of where we want to go. And more importantly, we got superior results in cases where faces directly touch the background, such as profiles, in these cases, and 3/4 faces. In that seam between the face and the background, it really helped us in those cases. So we've talked about where we started, how we landed on the veiling solution, how we captured the data. And so let's talk a little bit about working with documentary footage. The footage was acquired, in this case, from many different low quality sources: mobile phones, hidden cameras, almost entirely without supplemental lighting. And because of these, because of the conditions of the environment where cameras might put somebody at risk, everything was low profile. So unlike a normal visual effects production where you can count on quality pixels with consistent grain patterns for the whole show, it was more likely to see heavy grain and compression artifacts, and have them vary from shot to shot, even sometimes within a sequence. The press conference, which you've seen a little bit of, included footage from 3 different cameras, and one of them was interlaced. So we had different color spaces, a lot going on. And in addition to that, we had a lot of what we call complications with the footage. Complex backgrounds, a lot of people shooting people in profile over complex backgrounds. And most of the face-centric neural networks are generally very good at camera-facing action. But because when you track this, half of the frame is background, they need a little help. And this is where semantic mats really help the network distinguish between foreground and background. And those pre-trained comps over the background helped us with that edge and create a better seam between the face and the backgrounds when people are in profile. Also, we found out people who are in danger are often camera shy. They touch their faces a lot. And every time somebody touches their face, we need to create a mat to remove that. So matting here is not entirely a simple task. The similarities between skin tone, between faces and hands is not that great. And in the beginning, we used a combination of manual roto and rotobrush. And more recently, we've been using sort of our history of manual rotos to improve a semantic segmentation model to at least recognize hands and some other items automatically. When an object is removed, obviously there's a hole in its place, and edge blends, we couldn't just edge blend in. So originally we were tracking in still frames, and around the same time we were dealing with this, a paper deep flow guided video in painting paper was released, and its technique saved us from this sort of like really laborious tracking of still frames. This is what that looks like in motion. So you can see the pretty seamless in the areas where Maxim is covered. There were a handful of these dirty over-the-shoulder shots, which I wish we could say we solved in an interesting way, but we didn't. So I thought I'd mention them because there's a lot of room for study here and how to determine what's through a a soft out of focus edge. Transparent occluders like smoke pose a unique challenge with respect to identity protection, such as how to fail gracefully. If we're originally moving towards doing this in the wild, we want to make sure that if a face can't be found, we can do something intelligent in those cases. Interestingly enough, straight training gave us this soft skin-toned smoke that moved in a similar way to smoke, and it looked really interesting. But in the end, we decided to go use traditional compositing here and just remove the smoke, repair the face, trained, and then put the smoke back in afterwards. The most common situations were breaking frame, faces breaking frame. The pipeline obviously needs a whole face, which we've already discussed with the occluders. So every time a face crossed an edge, it had to be tracked and repaired. We created this two-stage tracking process that every shot went through. And this let us dovetail this edge breaking case with our occluder case. And so basically, after we did an initial face identification and track, we could run everything through the same pipeline. A special case of breaking frame is an extreme close-up, obviously breaking several frames at once. This face, the face outside this frame was synthesized, run through the model, super resolution process was applied, and then the 6K face was cropped back into the 4K frame. In very dark scenes where the grain was heavy, the signal to noise ratio was so great that grain caused the model to solve with different expressions. Here I'm zooming in just to show you some of the grain as it's lifted. Before we added the degraining workflow, Vlad here had crazy eyes, and they were jumping around something out of a horror film, frame to frame. His expressions changed. And so we applied a pretty heavy degraining process, which is also neural network driven at this point. White balance, a lot of consumer cameras have auto white balance on by default. It's not an option to turn them off. Auto exposures as well was something that we had a lot of, was represented a lot. In these cases, dominant colors were pulled from the faces, and the face exposure was, we attempted to normalize that. So, so things that went into the model, and this again goes to how important data prep is that we tried to reduce the number of variables that the neural network had to deal with, so that the layers and the memory that it was using could be used for more subtle motions like the facial expressions. Obviously, when you're doing a color correction like this, we used CDL so that color correction could be reversed to place the faces back into the shots. Quarter faces were challenging beyond the benefit of processing them, but they were necessary. It's not great to have effects pop on and off. So quarter faces were labeled with landmarks beyond the angle required for the identification part of veiling, and the function was applied to blend in and out of the effects wherever necessary. And so we got that's just that shot in motion. And we felt like we did a lot of this blending in and out because there were a lot of shots with this quarter face, and it worked pretty well, as long as we were past the point of recognition. Many of the tools for face tracking assume one face, or they are frame based, and index of the faces are, they might change per frame. Usually they're organized from left to right, or in the order in which they're found, which when you're doing multi-resolution can be interesting. This worked for a handful of shots in the film, but often one person would leave the frame and another would come into frame. So simple indexing didn't really work for us. There were a lot of other situations, for instance, this shot where people were coming and going and also changing their order in frame. This happened enough that we implemented a face encoding using AlexNet to help identify the subjects automatically. So we had our 23 subjects had an encoding, and we could kind of like know who it was that were identified per frame. All 3 subjects in this shot change position as in the last shot, but also we see some complex combinations of framing, occlusion, and face ID. A lot of this was applying attention, but the components that we built through this whole workflow were created in a modular way and could be applied when and where necessary. This modular approach of building simple, trustworthy components meant that the solutions could be chained together as necessary to meet the needs of any individual shot. One of the more emotional scenes in the film. There was also a minor in the film, and the request to cover this minor, originally Public Square thought that maybe she was young enough and she would change enough throughout the years that it wouldn't be a problem, but they decided after our data acquisition that maybe it would be a good idea to veil her as well. So we tried training against a couple of the doubles we'd already shot, but nothing was quite working until we decided to try and de-age the double before applying it to the network. And we think that worked out pretty well. This was at the end of Welcome to Chechnya. We have she was in several shots, and feel like we got a pretty youthful look there. Since then, we've looked into StyleGAN for driving maybe an age, and we think we're going to find, we haven't come to a solution yet. We think we're going to find a similar we need to shoot our own data kind of situation. This is a few frames, 2 frames run through with 3 different coefficients. 1 is no change for StyleGAN. Sorry, 0 is no change for StyleGAN. 2 is younger and 4 is more, the youngest. And you can see here on the coefficient of 4 that the ages between the top picture and the bottom picture vary widely, and that maybe even at 0, we're not necessarily representing the same person as effectively as we would like to. So we're very interested. We're awestruck by what StyleGAN is doing, and we feel like we need to, if we want to explore that more, we need to shoot our own data for driving the coefficients that we want to move. This shows the results of a more recent film where we de-aged the double before training. The solution calls back to an earlier idea of warping faces. And so it's actually, we're using this machine learning prep where we're not using machine learning as we might in the previous StyleGAN idea. And this, the leftmost column is the original frame. The center column is the de-aged frame, which is done by warping landmarks, and then used for training, and this is the training result on the right. And here's that picture in motion. I showed this one. It's not directly connected to Welcome Chechnya. It is human rights related, but more importantly, it speaks to this idea of detangling. And we actually shot 2 different face doubles for this one. They were very naturally different in their mannerisms. And comparing those tests that we did with each one, those mannerisms didn't translate. The results were equally different pictures, but the emotion came through similarly. So we're more confident than ever now that this idea that emotion is of the face double is decoupled from the emotion of the subject in the film. So this is our last topic, ethics, because it's one of the biggest topics of synthesizing images for media, specifically in documentary filmmaking. There's a lot of thought-provoking ideas in this conversation, and obviously everyone's concerned about fake media, and we were aware of this going into the project. There were some technical differences with fake media, but I like to think the philosophical differences are a lot more interesting. Fake pictures often take unwilling participants and present them to an unwitting audience. And to maintain journalistic integrity, our work and the project as a whole, we made a few careful decisions on how to avoid any downside of using this treatment. The first thing we did is the film has a pre-roll disclaimer, and we did this for two reasons. First, and the most obvious reasons, is we want to declare that edits have been made. But secondly, and more importantly, I think is to informing the audience, is that when the audience sees the veils for the first time, obviously this has never been done before at this point in our sort of journey. When they see the veils for the first time, we want them to register it and then get back to the story. So they're not spending precious attention cycles trying to figure out what's not quite right around this. And this was, again, part of this conversation around the uncanny valley and helping the audience know that these people were protected. The softness of the veil is also paired with this blurry edge. And this connects the veils to the visual language of blurry oval, face fogging, and allows an easier connection for the audience between the disclaimer and the picture. A third thing we did is that the soft edge was played up for the first 20 shots, and really any time a new character was introduced. Max Anderson, the additional editor on the film, actually recut the opening sequences after the visual effects were done to remove dialogue so the audience wouldn't be reading as many subtitles, and they could focus on visually process the veils and this idea of what was going on. And then our hope was they would be able to register it and then return their attention to the story. And so that's all I have for that, and hopefully I didn't run too long, and we can get into some Q&A stuff, because I'm really interested to hear what questions you guys have, and where within this there's more or less interest. So thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Ryan. That some great work there, and extremely interesting. And machine learning is so topical now. It's fantastic that it's being used in this way. And I couldn't help but thinking, in my work these days with digital media, we do a lot of prototyping, and part of the process is actually trying to break that prototype and push it to its limits and find out where the weaknesses are. I'm curious as to what sort of a process you had for quality assurance, especially something as perilous as identifying an individual, because obviously there are groups out there that are trying to reverse engineer exactly what you are doing.
Well, we hope they're not able to do that. We feel pretty confident in the technology end of things that all the original pixels are replaced. There's an asymmetric move between one face and the other. So there's not a path back. There's not anything in the decoder that would reveal what the encoder for the original face was. So we feel pretty confident that this is like an encryption algorithm, and that without the key you wouldn't be able to. And the key being the weights, which are hundreds of megabytes of values, that without those weights you wouldn't be able to reverse engineer it. The other thing that as far as making sure people are protected, David France and his team actually gave write-off to everyone in the film. So they were able to see the footage of themselves being veiled, and when they felt comfortable with it, that was our threshold. An interesting story, well, at least I think it's interesting. A couple of the people who saw the film and talked to David and Alice afterwards said that they felt like they were able to, they forgot at moments that it was them on film, and they were able to, in a way, process the trauma because they were watching somebody else go through it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I couldn't help but thinking during your presentation, and as someone that's been a character animator and involved in character design and all, we're always hypersensitive about what's happening around the eyes. I mean, as a newborn, we're looking up for our mother's eyes, and that seems to be the big identifier. And considering the fact that we just went through 14 plus months of a pandemic, where that was one of the few facial features, do you think there's going to be even closer scrutiny to that area as we move into this field of, I don't want to call it deep fakes, but I guess veils?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's interesting. I'll come to deepfakes in a second, but yeah, I do think that there is going to be some scrutiny in eyes. We really we didn't try to hit a pixel perfect replacement. We found through the process and through the research studies at Dartmouth College is that motion seems to be a lot more valuable than pixels. So pixel sharpness is not where our focus is, and we always want to be at a point where we are obvious, where the pixels are soft, the eyes are a little soft, you're maybe below the resolution of eyelashes. But certainly with the halo effect, we want to make sure that we're approaching this with integrity, so that there's nobody's going to say that we try to change a picture in a way that could be used for negative consequences.
Well, and as you know, the eyes have always been the deal breaker in the uncanny valley, as far as whether that is, whether a synthetic character was alive or not was truly read by the eyes.
But as an animator, you realize that motion is really a key component to translating emotion of a scene, and we carry so much information in our face, and it's not stills of our face. It's the motion of our face, and that's the micro expressions in between and how the face moves. A neutral face for one person might look like a smile in a still frame, but you can tell when somebody smiles and their face, the corners of their mouths go up. So you can see the movement, the delta in time is often maybe even more important than the fidelity of a single frame.
So when you were capturing the stand-in faces, if you will, how much were they studying the original footage and trying to capture some of those things?
Yeah, it was a really interesting conflict, because we couldn't release the footage to show it, because we couldn't show. So Johnny Hahn, the director of the face capture sessions, was actually responsible for conveying what he wanted to get. But again, we did that because we weren't sure that it was going to work. But now we've been through it a couple of times, we're 100% confident with just getting facial expressions where there's no need for somebody to know what they're, as long as we get the range of motion. So if somebody's wincing in the film, we want to get the double wincing, or whatever the maybe extreme expression is. But a lot of it is really just general movement of the face. If you've seen some of the front camera facing that are used for, they do this calibration where they do this big left and right face movements, and that's the kind of thing that shows us where the wrinkles are, and it shows us how the face is going to move when it's in that extreme pose. So if we can get the pictures of the face, the neural networks are surprisingly good at connecting the dots and making things work in a believable way.
So you came into the production after the footage was shot, but
oh yeah, they had almost a complete finished edit.
Yeah, I'm still, and I guess it's more a question to David France. How did he convince all of these people that they would be protected? Were they shown any sort of techniques as to how they might possibly be veiled?
Yeah, well, if you've met David France, he's very convincing. He's very confident in how he goes about in the world. So he did show them something. I don't remember exactly what the clip was from, but it was a clip of a person with a cartoon effect applied to them.
Uh-huh.
And And that was enough. And in the fact that, you know, David is very involved in this community, and with that trust already there, and his interest in bringing attention to this, he was able to convince the operators of the network to film within these special places, which was really like the most outstanding part of this whole process, is that he got the footage to start with. There's no way that somebody could have created this effect and then tried to sell a director on it, and then director tried to sell somebody else on it. It just that wouldn't play. It was really fantastic that we got the opportunity to help David solve this kind of corner he was in.
Yeah, I imagine when you first approach people and you say, "Oh, don't worry, you know, your identity will never be revealed." People are imagining black bars or blurred out faces and things. I guess the thing that I appreciated the most in the documentary was the fact that it did have that feel of stark realism, and that, I think that was really important with the subject matter as well.
Yeah, I do as well. Yeah, it was, and obviously the hidden camera footage and the you know, you were really there in extreme situations. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think a lot would have been lost if the, as you said, we are from birth looking for eyes and facial features, and I read some science recently that says we might actually have some of that baked into our retinal neural path to our brain.
Really?
So yeah.
Let's go to a couple of questions from our audience. First one is, curious if you have any feedback from any of the subjects about how they felt about the work that you did. If yes, did any of the feedback affect the work you did on the film or inform how you approach new subjects or projects?
Yeah, I mean, luckily and surprisingly, all of the feedback has been positive. David and Alice and the Public Square Films team they're still involved in some of the networks over there, and they have been involved in and talked to people that were in the film. I got to meet a couple of them, and yeah, everybody's just really excited about the doors that this opens up for witness testimony. Another interesting thing is Abraham Luna, the actor, the one actor in the film. Everybody else was a volunteer, but who played Maxim, was the veil for Maxim. He got to see this as we were doing. He was part of the first test, so as we were doing the data capture for the second test, he got to see himself on somebody else's body, and he's like, it's very weird because he's kind of the same build. And so that was the other aspect of it, is that the team has also been able to speak to the volunteers who were, and they're also very excited that they were able to lend their likeness to, as I said earlier, as an activism, like a human shield. Very excited. So yeah, we're just at this point we're staying the course, but we're always open to adjusting where necessary if there were any problems.
Yeah, and that was something, you know, I really felt towards the end of the film. I was waiting for that aftermath to know that all of these folks achieved some sense of security in some place, and that detection wasn't going to happen. And so, you know, I think that speaks to the power of the documentary as well.
Another interesting thing about the documentary raising the awareness of this is it's actually changed some. It was referenced in Parliament in the UK, and it has changed some policy in the US with regard to sanctions, I believe, in that part of the world. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, we've got another question here from Jose. Such a great presentation. Thank you so much. From a technique side, could you talk more about how you pair the data of the two identities when training the network? Like if you are training for a shot of, say, 10 seconds, did you use all the poses in the actor database or just a bit? How do you make your decisions?
That's a fantastic question, and it's a very complicated answer, but I'll try to sum it up in a short period.
We got plenty.
We actually, model management was a big part of what we did. I didn't go into it because I felt like it was maybe too much on the technical end of things, but we had 3 levels of model management. And by model, I mean the neural net, the results of the neural network. So we had a show-wide neural network for each character. We had a sequence level, and then we had a shot level. The show-wide used all the frames of a subject and all of the matched frames of from the pairings that we made through that sort of complicated reverse lookup. Once we trained at a show level for a week, then we moved to the sequence level, and then only frames that were represented or needed for that sequence would be trained. And then when necessary, we would train on a shot level. And so we would have shot models. And by doing that, we actually had a good general idea. So we knew we could get a consistent result across the whole film for any given character. And then at a sequence level, often we're talking about lighting changes. So it's an interesting idea about neural networks that they are limited capacity. So it's a bit like a hash table. These VGG based, you get these small images that are very deep. There's 1,000 images deep, and they work a little bit like a hash table, but you only have so many hashes, and you want to use that. So by starting with an overall, we get a good idea of the pairing, and then we get a good idea at a sequence level of lighting, and then we get a good idea of very specific expressions for very specific scenes at the shot level. I hope that answers the question.
I think it did. And, I really appreciate how much research and thought has gone into this process to apply it to something such as a documentary, as well as protecting identities. Where do you think you can take your work next?
Well, the documentary filmmakers are very excited about the possibility of being able to tell their stories in a way that connects better with the audience. So I don't. That's where we're focused right now. Obviously, documentaries, there's not big budgets, so we're figuring out. We haven't quite solved that equation yet, but we're working on projects, and we're doing our best to cover all the needs. And we actually did some talks with MIT Open Doc Labs and Witness.org, and they really sort of highlighted this idea that this should be technology that is available to all filmmakers and not just the highest budget documentary films. So we're really working on how do we get the cost down, and we're doing a pilot program right now with one production where we've directed them. We've opened up our process for capturing the data. They're capturing all their own data. They're doing all their machine learning prep work, and then they're shipping it to us for the quote unquote engine, and then we'll give them back frames to go into their composites. So we feel like this, maybe it shifts the resources from in-house, but at the same time we're also refining those processes so that they are more simple. And actually the shot that you saw of the de-aged was straight out of a template. So that was almost entirely hands-off. There was one or two parameters that were dialed to adjust the size of the blurs, but we're getting there with at least for interview style footage. We're getting there for hands-off. We're looking at we have a Jetson NX, so we're looking at possibly applying that in a constrained model in a real-time scenario. So that would be fantastic, and it would be available to everybody, I think, if we could get it down to that. But we're working on these things.
Fantastic. I'm sure you learned a lot through all of the refining and streamlining of your pipeline and techniques and all, but there still must be some wicked problems out there that you would love to solve. What's still sitting up there on the mountain?
What isn't? Like it can all be improved. And everything that is working can work faster or more automated. Really, in this idea of making a turnkey solution for filmmakers is how to present that, how to present the interface to them, how to solve the security requirements of transferring footage from them and back to them with test subjects, and also how to generate. I guess a big problem is how to synthesize faces without doing a shoot, because a shoot is actually a big, the shoot and ingesting the footage is a big sort of chunk of time and computing resources at this point. So if there could be a way to sort of minimize that, I think we could bring the cost down a bit more.
And I imagine with the casting too, you go through a spectrum of acting talents, if you will, as far as what you'd be able to get from that capture.
Well, again, I think that the acting talent is irrelevant as long as we can get the facial expressions. And we found that where an actor, you might say, look concerned, with somebody who's not an actor, you'll say, give me 132 divided by 64. And you'll get the look, you'll get the face expression that you want, and you don't need that many frames of it.
So essentially you hit them with the wicked problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. I think we're going to have to wrap it up there, Ryan, but we really appreciate your time and all of this incredible information, and congratulations on putting together some truly amazing effects and allowing this documentary to move forward. You know, something that's very, very important these days. And we thank you for joining Spark, and we wish you all the best in all of your endeavors, and looking forward to seeing where this all goes.
Me too. Thank you for all of that. We were really fortunate to be part of this process, and thank David for having a crazy idea. And obviously, thank you to Spark for having us on. It's I think it's an important part of the process to be able to share the knowledge back with the community and help. Maybe there's some ideas that we hadn't thought of that somebody who sees this will come up with and help solve.
Fantastic. We hope to have you back at Spark real soon.
I hope to do something that's worthwhile.
Oh, I'm sure you will. Thank you once again, and thank you everyone for joining us. This has been a fantastic Spark webinar I was going to call it a podcast, but it's definitely a webinar, and I hope you all enjoyed it, and look for more of Ryan's work. Cheers, everyone.